Hello, every pony, and welcome back to another Feature Friday with your host, Never After All Readings. Today's reading will be Mistakes Best Not Remembered by Soren. Description is as follows. Memories hurt. She knows this. 1,000 years on the moon with nothing but your own thoughts is torture upon a level no pony could ever achieve. Sometimes the easiest thing to do is hope and pretend they never existed, but nothing can change the past, and sometimes those memories don't want to be forgotten. One and only chapter, Mistakes Best Not Remembered. Dark hooves landed softly upon the wooden planks of an old rope bridge. There was not a sound to be heard across all of the forest, the creatures within having vacated the grounds come the full moon. The minuscule creak of wooden planks and the unmistakable sound of strained ropes cut the brittle air like a knife, shattering the tense tranquility. Wings, the color of night, spread for balance, catching the moonlight upon their dark feathers, drawing strength from it as a lone alicorn crossed the chasm. The castle ahead was but a ruin, lit by the calming moonlight to cast a ghostly shadow down upon the overgrown grass below. It was so familiar, yet so different. Somehow, the very castle that had once been the home of their greatness had become this. This crumbling mass of stone and glass was her home. The lone mare hung her head as she crossed the grounds, watching her hooves tromp the grass as the looming rubble drew ever closer. The ever-free forest was taking it back, piece by piece. She lifted her head only upon mounting the stone steps before the grand entrance. Blankets of moss seeped from the cracks in the stones, and the vines curled up the leaning towers like malicious snakes of decay, slowly pulling the weather-torn stone back to the earth. Swallowing the lump in her throat, she stepped towards the double door. The enchanted doors must still have held traces of Celestia's magic, for they remained hung in their frames. The left door hung slightly ajar, whilst the right hung only on its bottom hinge. Tendrils of blue magic reached out. The terrible grate of wood and stone filled the night as the entrance was used properly for the first time in 1,000 years. It was just as magnificent as she remembered. 2 guards, clad in royal armor, stood aside with practiced dignity and grace as he strode into the grand chamber. Although it was night, millions of candles lit the elegant chambers, hung from the dome ceiling, casting their twinkling light over the stained glass lining the chamber. The tapestries of night and day hung above their respective thrones, and there, at her throne, sat a princess of white. She was young and cheerful, her face marked with a gentle, somewhat mischievous smile. The smile widened as the princess beckoned. "Sister." In a blink, it was all gone. The transition from warm to cold plunged through her like an icy blade. Glancing an unyielding fragment of rubble with a forehoof, she staggered. The ceiling lay in ruin about the floor, untouched since the day of her banishment. Celestia's golden throne had been reduced to rubble, leaving only one side of it in a state of decay, grown over with vines and moss, much like everything else. Bronze scones held only husks of torches which had burnt away untouched. A single tear fell to the floor, then another, 2 more, and that was it. Sniffles filled the chambers, echoing from the walls and coming back to her ears with only a ghastly overlay. This had been their home, and now it was nothing but ruin. Of course, Celestia would no longer be able to use this place, not with the banishment of her sister hanging upon her shoulders. It had not been a light decision, this was known. A small part of Celestia had been banished to the moon as well that day. Her innocence, her careless joy. After that day, she had no longer been a sissy, but instead, Princess Celestia, the ruler of both day and night, and the sole leader of Equestria. It was that day she was forced to grow up and leave whatever joys of her youth remaining within her soul behind for good. The lone alicorn stopped before two thrones and torn tapestries. It was that night she had taken her sister's innocence, all with her own jealousy and stupid ambition. Looking back upon it now, the decision was foolish. The day was not day without night. For the cold of the night, there was no reason to cherish the warmth. And without day, there would be no sunrise to look forward to, no time to farm and feed to harvest. Closing her eyes, she fought back new-found tears. The breeze that came drove her to think of icy claws as it raked through her fur, tugging and swirling around her form. With the breeze came a creak, the tiniest of minuscule creaks, but it was there. Behind the thrones, on the far right of the chamber, a wooden door braced and bolted with iron swayed on its hinges. Again it creaked, and the alicorn's eyes were inexplicably drawn to it. Princess, a guard stuttered, trotting swiftly beside her as she strode through a narrow hall. What is your sorrow? Silence, escort, she returned. Round up the tenants of thy castle. For what is your reason, your highness? She rounded on him. It does not matter why. Now be gone, and bring them. It was like coming out of a dream as the door creaked open under the influence of her outstretched hoof, the spiraling staircase leading down to the depths of the castle. It would be so much easier if she didn't remember it, but every detail of that day was locked in her head. She had relived it every day, all day, trapped in the confines of nothing within the moon for 1,000 years. That one day, that one mistake made on a decision thrown at a whim. What few ponies realized that she had not been banished on the moon, but in it. It was a cruel irony that she would be imprisoned in her very element. There, in the moon, she had no body and no sense. Only her mind had been with her. Sometimes her mind forgot that she had a body once more, and it still tried to wander and roam as it was doing now. A cruel dread settled in her heart as she began to step down the steps. One echoing hoofstep after another. This needed to be left alone. It didn't need to be remembered, but what if? She was forced to light her horn as the steps rounded about and down to the left, cutting out the moonlight of the ceilingless throne room. It was a question that had been eating at her for 1,000 years. It had to be answered. What is this? A mayor, dressed in a flowing attire, demanded as she was heralded towards the door behind the royal thrones, amongst hundreds of others. Thou shalt not treat me with such aggression. What is the meaning of this? The pony, clad in full armor, that stood before her lowered his head. For your assurance, milady. Says whom? Watching from just above, the alicorn flared her mighty wings and dropped down before the mare, hooves clopping like thunder against the stone. Says I, now go. The mare folded her ears and nodded. Yes, princess. She fell into line with the others. The dark alicorn turned away, eyes falling upon the polished floor. The moon was powerful, a center of magic that she herself could not understand. But not all that magic was good. With great power came great danger. Hiding the tenants in the dungeons was practical. It was for their own safety. It was for her own assurance. Because once she tapped into the power of the moon, it was unforeseeable what she may do. By the third time around, the stairs had begun to taper, forming a steeper spiral. The air grew colder. Water seeped from the walls, feeding the mold that clogged the small passage with a wet, musty odor so thick it could be felt upon the tongue. It was twice more around before the stairs finally gave way to flat stone and a long corridor. Jail cells lined the walls, empty. Some still remained locked, with others hung wide open. Her breath fanned out before her as she passed the gloom towards the second block. They hadn't ever really used these for anything other than storage, but once in a while their true purpose would be served. The passage gave away to a medium-sized room, and at the end of it, a heavy cage door formed in iron bars and plates, and there, fritted through the latch, was a padlock. A soft blue glow emanated from the keyhole. "This be all the tenants?" she demanded impatiently, pressuring the guard who stood before her. He watched as one last mare sidled her way through the archway into the second cell block, guiding a foal ahead of her. Maintaining his composure fairly well, he checked a scroll, then made 2 last marks. "Aye, Princess." 20 other guards stood around him, looking about, their faces a mixture of concern and interest. "Good." She tapped her hoof on the cold floor. "Now send your own." He blinked, then looked towards the other defenders. "Princess." With a growl, her horn flared as a blue glow engulfed the stallion. He was tossed unceremoniously through the doorway. One look from her firm eyes told the others, and hurriedly followed. Her blue aura switched to the massive steel door, swinging it shut as the castle guards watched helplessly from the other side. "What shall we do, Princess?" She snapped the heavy lock into place over the latch. Lowering her head, she aimed her horn at the keyhole and set the enchantment. "Remain here and keep calm of the others. When my sister has been defeated, I shall return for thee." She staggered backwards, only remaining on her hooves by falling against the wall. It cannot be." Her voice echoed down the tunnel, returning muffled and distorted. Lowering her head, a small wisp of blue magic trickled from the end of her horn and snaked through the keyhole of the lock. There was a brittle snap of the mechanism, and the entire device rusted away before her very eyes. The iron door creaked and swung inwards on its own accord, stopping halfway as the middle hinge seized with a pained whine and a stubborn refusal. "It cannot be," she repeated more quietly. "Thou must have returned to the castle after." Celestia would never return to the castle. It was a mark of shame, a remembrance to the day that she had banished her own blood. It made sense. There before the gate was a single set of bones. Steel blue armor still clasped the form, wearing a thick layer of dust. The figure held a spear in his forehoof, and evidence of his attempt to try to pry the lock was clear and present from the fragments of stone on the ground and the shattered spearhead. A few feet back, there was another, curled up as if he had perished in his sleep. The distinguishing markings upon his armor were impossible to miss. "Froststorm," she whispered, stepping over the first pair. "Quartermaster." The next skeleton, without armor. Lufty. The caretaker's clothing were still fully intact. Cook. She could go on no more. Backwards she went, back the way she came and up the winding staircase. She was a goddess. This could not be. "When my sister is defeated, I shall return for thee." The door to the dungeons slammed shut behind her. Spinning around to face the vile entrance, a bright flash of blue erupted from the tip of her horn. A second later, a deep, splintering sound burst from the door as if it was compressed into the frame. The wood splintered and cracked, crushed into itself as the stone around it morphed and stretched to conceal her greatest mistake. A moment later, there was nothing but a stone wall, perfectly blended in with the rest of the ruined castle. This never was. The crisp air stabbed into her lungs like knives, brought into her body in staggering gasps. "Surely no pony knows of this. I would have heard of it." No pony could ever learn of this. No pony would. If they did, what would they think of her? It had been an accident, nothing more. Why should they know? Gritting her teeth, she fought back flowing tears. I just wanted to protect you. A single leaf turned over on the floor, stirred by the gentle breeze. Then another, then another, then 30. The mare instinctually brought her hoof to cover her eyes as the central chamber became a wind tunnel swirling about her in a tornado of debris and dirt. Nightmare. The name sent freezing shivers up the mare's spine. A single voice had whispered, though it would have been impossible to hear it within the deafening gale had the name not been spoken in her very head. From the gale moved a figure not of blood nor bone, but shadow. It moved across the stone floor like any normal shadow would, lit by the moonlight. It was as if an invisible pony were casting it upon the ground before her very eyes. Then another appeared, but on the wall to the left, followed by 3 more. Dozens appeared until the room was full of them, some shadows threatening to obscure others. What do you want? Her normally regal voice was weak and tiny against the wind. It is not what we want, but what you seek, what you deserve. Their words did not travel from her ear to her brain, but right into her very conscious self. Unlike before, however, instead of just one voice, there were many. Mares and stallions alike spoke as one, more than she could even count. They knew what she wanted, but so did she. I seek forgiveness. Her voice was lost to the wind, but they must have heard. The winds escalated until she struggled to simply remain on her hooves. There can be no forgiveness for your evil, they roared in vicious harmony. The surrounding gale blasted over her like the breath of 1,000 voices. The loss of hundreds rests on your hooves, and you seek forgiveness. Please, I meant you no harm. Her tears were lost to the wind, sucked into the freezing inferno. I imprisoned you in hopes of protecting you from it. I was foolish, tainted with jealousy towards my sister, but I was never evil. The winds began to calm, but only slightly. I sought power from within the moon, but I fear I would hurt those around me. I hid you away until I could be sure it was safe. Looking back upon the plan, it was flawed and arrogantly short-sighted. Once I was banished by my sister. There was no pony to know where you had been kept. Celestia still believes you had fled the castle of your own accord, as I assumed she had freed you until just recently. It was never meant to happen this way. Her heart was beating like that of a rabbit's, her ears popping from the surrounding pressure. I'm sorry. The winds began to fade slowly, tattered parchment and debris raining to the ground. The shadows watched her. On the wall ahead, larger than the others, the shape of a pony formed, bright yellow eyes looking down upon her. With death comes wisdom, and with wisdom comes enlightenment, the voice whispered. She bowed her head, eyes closed, silent. You are a fool. They were hardly audible, but there was no mistaking the rage that was sent through her mind. Emotion stronger than what she would have ever thought possible clogged her senses. Anger, regret, pain, suffering, sadness, but most of all, hate for her. The resulting blast of wind hurled the alicorn backwards, throwing her against the toppling block of stone. Frantically, she scrambled to her hooves, too fearful and ashamed to even do much as to light a spell. Maybe in death wisdom will come to you as well, for you choose to hide your mistakes instead of learning from them. The words hurt more than anything. They hurt because they were true. It was easier to pretend that Nightmare Moon had never existed at all, that it was nothing more than a tale. Just now, hiding the door, it was very possible that it would have been shoved into the back of her mind and never thought of again. I know. There wasn't much else to do but hang her head. With a good attempt, she could probably escape. The roof was open and the doors behind her still open. But there was a sickening churning in her gut, one that didn't wish for escape. It screamed for punishment. Even after 1,000 years of disembodied, boring agony, she still wished for punishment, especially now after such a gruesome reveal. Her foolishness had not only hurt her sister, but taken the lives of hundreds. She only wanted to protect them. Do what you must. The words that had left her mouth were spoken from numb lips. Her eyes shut tight as she tried to keep her legs from shaking. If any punishment were worthy of her, that done by the hooves of the very ponies she had hurt would be most acceptable. There had never been a more imperfect princess. She is sorry, whispered a single voice amongst the shadowy crowd. She regrets it, said another. The two voices hurriedly drowned out by many, all muttering to one another. The effect was an aurora standing amongst the bickering crowd, only offset by the fact that no pony was there. Then, as if silenced by a wall, it stopped. Ears perking, she looked up, daring to open one eye. The shadows were gone, leaving nothing but moonlight and gentle breeze that ruffled her coat. She wasn't ready for the invisible force that hit her like a train. In a much unlike Alicorn fashion, she was hurled backwards through a set of double doors entering the castle, down the steps, and into the grass she went, disoriented and breathless. Leave, they whispered. Staggering to her hooves, she hurriedly took notice of the fact that blood stained her muzzle, having run from her nostrils shortly after the sudden concussion. The same went for her ears and her now bloody tears. I'm sorry. She lowered her stance, falling into a bow worthy of a peasant. They could not turn her away without either punishment or forgiveness, any of the two, but not like this. The invisible force struck her again, sending her tumbling and crashing right up to the start of the bridge. Do not return here. She was much slower getting up this time. Her joints ached and her head throbbed. The second blow hadn't helped her nosebleed. Desperation set in now. You cannot let me go without forgiveness, and if not that, then punishment. But I cannot leave like this. This time, she braced for the blow she knew was coming. It was like getting hit by a wall of water, only faster and harder. It carried her clear across the chasm and deposited her limp form upon the grass just on the other side. You are cursed to live with the knowledge of what you have done, they spoke. Trying to pick herself up proved to be a challenge. She made it halfway before her aching hooves gave out and she dropped back into the grass, head spinning like a top. It took everything not to lose her stomach contents, but the blackness was coming, creeping up in the corners of her vision as the voices grew even louder within her head. And you will live with the knowledge that you have not earned forgiveness for your naivety, and you will never. This is your punishment. Sister? This was a new voice, one that was heard with her ears and not her brain. In the moonlight, illuminated against the treetops, was a white silhouette. Sister, what has happened? Though the tone of the white mare's voice was loud, it came quietly as unconsciousness crept closer. Sister, who has done this? The feeling of being lifted and the cold wind on her coat took over. You will be all right, sister, once I find out. The rest of it was lost to unhearing ears. You will always be Nightmare Moon. Holy shit. That's like all I have to say to that. I had picked it randomly. I didn't even read it. So, yeah. That's a sad right there. Oof. I cried. I ain't even gonna lie. Some of those scenes, I had tears running down my eyes, but yeah, no, that was a good read. As always, there will be a link to the story in the description below. Go and please show this author some love. Holy crap. I mean, I have nothing I can say. It's just, Yep. Well, thank you everybody for joining me for a good old Feature Friday. This was your host, Never After All, and I think I'm gonna go cry myself to sleep. So, hope you guys all have a wonderful Never After All.